Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. It is currently 5 a.m. as I made the inadvisable decision to drink black tea yesterday night. But that means it is a perfect time for me to bring you something that I am very, very excited to present. A major change in formatting based on the feedback that you guys gave me on the Robbie Lava channel future poll. If you still want to vote on that and haven't done so yet, link down in the description. I would love to hear from you. But even more importantly than that, I have a civilization build for you. In the LAVAnilla style, a remake that has been requested of me a handful of times in the past that I've been itching to get my hands on for quite some time. That being the Koreans. In my build, a naval and siege civilization. You may notice going into this build that we have some pretty different looking formatting options going on around here. I want to hear from you guys what you think about all of these. So please do not hesitate to share your thoughts and make your voices heard down in the comments section below. But with all that being said, let's move on to a quick summary of my approach in Age of Empires 2 theory crafting. For any of you who are just finding the channel for the first time, I have a focus on historical authenticity. In this particular series, LAVAnilla, I'm not as focused on literalism. I'm more trying to be truer to the feel of a civilization within the limited confines of the game as it stands right now. I'm also trying not to step on the toes of existing civilizations, though when I do, I will justify it as best as I can. Though beyond historical authenticity, another of my major focuses is implementability. I am trying to stick, again for this series, with what is actually possible to mod into the game. So if you see something that isn't possible to do based on your knowledge of the Genie editor or whatever else, please do let me know. And if you want to see me push the boundaries and not just stick with what I think is implementable, go skip to the end of the video in the LAVAnte-Garde section, where I talk about some of the things that I would do if I had no boundaries or limitations whatsoever. Another note, a disclaimer in this case, I am a hobbyist, not a historian. This channel is often wrong. I have to simplify a lot of the history I go over, and I forget stuff or am misled by my sources or whatever else all the time. So if you want to see any of my sources, check the presentation linked down below. All of my sources are in the speaker notes of this slide. And images and similar are credited in speaker notes as well. But beyond all that, I want your feedback. This is a community-oriented channel, and so if you see any history mistakes, like I just said, anything that's impossible to implement, like I just said, a big game balance concern, or anything else, please let me know down in the comments section, and if you make a reasonable argument, I will very likely change what you are concerned about. Lastly, if you like the community elements of this channel and want to see more of them, please go and join our Discord server down in the description below. It's a fun time. I'm active on there pretty often, and we have some really fantastic conversations. And without further ado, let's move in to the Koreans at a glance. Who were the Koreans? Well, my build of the Koreans focuses on the later Korean states of Goryeo and Joseon. There were many earlier Korean civilizations, but Goryeo was the first to unify the peninsula and actually take some territory beyond. Here's what it looked like at, I think, its greatest extent. The state of Goryeo and Joseon were classic Confucian bureaucracies, much like China, who they were very, very heavily influenced by, with a caste-based population system led by scholarly aristocrats, though commoners were remarkably enfranchised, even in comparison to neighbors like China, from whence they got their Confucian ideals. You'll see hints of this in the build later. They also had a lot of Buddhist influences, and also a lot of Tengri-adjacent folk traditions, making it quite an interesting melting pot in the grand scheme of East Asia. I should note, by the way, that while I am calling this civilization the Koreans, it's not an ideal demonym. I couldn't find a proper demonym for Goryeo or Joseon, or else I would have used that, right? But Koreans does have name recognition, which is, I'm reluctant to admit, important. And it really could be worse. We do get the word Korea from Goryeo, after all. So Koreans as a name is not that far afield of the reality. So with an idea of who they were out of the way, let's move on to the history of the later Korean states. This begins with later Goguryeo, which is a breakaway state from a rival Korean nation of Silla. Silla was very, very dominant from 600 to 900-ish AD, but towards the end of its legacy, it started to fracture, and many smaller states started to take bites out of it. Later, Goguryeo was kind of an interesting case. It was named after a very powerful and prominent earlier Korean state, Goguryeo, and it had kind of a complete frickin' lunatic as its leader. He changed his name a bunch, said he could read minds, claimed to be a Buddha. He was a weird guy, and he eventually got deposed in 918. The new leader rechristened the state Goryeo, and was very, very popular. He went on to unify the peninsula over the next couple decades, and kind of posited the state of Goryeo as a successor to Goguryeo, which it had previously been named after. He eventually retook the old Goguryeo capital of what we now know as Pyongyang and relocated his own palace there. And from here, Goryeo became a very powerful trade hub. It did have to deal with many Tungusic rivals in the north, such as the Jurchens and the Khitans, both of which I have done builds on. Links to them up here. We'll start with the Khitans. Now, from here, though, Korean history starts to get a little bit more complicated. The Mongols, they caused problems to a lot of people, didn't they? In the 1200s, they invaded Korea 7 times. Eventually, Goryeo did win and drove out the Mongols, but the land was absolutely obliterated by the decades of war. And this led to some internal power struggles which eventually weakened the state, and by the 1300s they were ripe for the picking. And amidst this chaos, someone came about and picked them. The Joseon dynasty took charge, and the Goryeo dynasty was shown the door. Now, the Joseon era was a period of dramatic advancement within Korea. Not only did they expand trade even further, because in large part due to their good relations with Ming China, they absolutely owned their corner of the Pacific. Because of this enormous trade enriching the nation, bringing foreign technologies in, and making a more cosmopolitan culture, it was a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity. This is where Japan comes in. Japan had been on actually really good terms with Korea until the 1500s. But then, with Korea dominating trade and Japan starting to have eyes for international trade, they started to squabble over trade rights. Korea was really effectively controlling the seas, Japan couldn't get a foot in the door, and this led to serious Japanese resentment and piracy. Now, Korea was very, very good at battling pirates. They had been doing so for centuries at this point. But Hideyoshi, after winning the Sengoku Jidai, initiated the Imjin War in 1592. Now, the more you learn about this event in history, the more you learn what an absolute tragedy it was. According to some estimates that I read, the Imjin War was the largest war of the 16th century, period, with 500,000 soldier combatants involved. Holy shit, right? That's insane. And not only that, it could have been stopped within the first month if the Korean officials had got their act together and actually properly defended their coastline against Japanese landing vessels. But they didn't, and it led to 7 years of absolute brutality. There were many serious miscalculations and catastrophes on both sides of this war, which eventually led to a brief pause in 1597 and then a final end to the Imjin War in 1598, with Korea again nominally winning. But, much like what happened with the Mongols 3 centuries earlier, the Imjin War, though technically a Korean victory, left the country devastated and Japan greatly enriched with all of the plunder. And once again, much like the Goryeo dynasty was left crippled by that war that they had technically won, so too were the Joseon left as easy pickings for the Jurchens. They were on their way into Ming China to conquer that, and stopped along the way to bash in the heads of the Joseon dynasty, leaving them as a vassal for the later Jurchen Chinese state of Qing. And that's where the AoE2 timeframe leaves Korea. Now, let's move on to the flavor section, the beautiful aesthetic details that make an AoE2 civilization something special. Their language would be Middle Korean. They currently speak Modern Korean. I will say Middle Korean would probably be pretty hard to research. But I did find one word in it, Z, ladies and gentlemen. Their ensign would be the early Joseon coat of arms superimposed on a traditional shield. I know that this is kind of a busy design, and so if you wanted to strip away all the weird cloud stuff around the dragon and just have a simplified dragon in that color scheme, that would work just as fine with me as well. The current Korean ensign bears a very common motif called the taeguk, which is used very commonly in a lot of Korean heraldry and has been for a very long time. But to me, at least, it just felt a little too generic, not to mention a little too modernized, because the taeguk we see in game is pretty much just the South Korean flag. Now, their architecture would be East Asian, yay, Though I could see potentially making a Korean architecture set at some point, because I do have a lot of other plans for Korean civilizations down the line, and they did have different looking buildings, but this works fine for now. And for their wonder, though the current Korean wonder is beautiful, it was actually destroyed during that Mongol invasion I was talking about. This one, Gyeongbokgung Palace, was the seat of Joseon power and makes much more sense for this more later-oriented take on the civilization. The current Korean wonder, though, is absolutely gorgeous and would totally belong on an earlier Korean civilization like Goguryeo or Silla. Now, for their castle, I would propose Hwaseong Fortress. It looks nice and different from one of the other East Asian-style buildings, while still having those kind of like iconic sloping roofs. With the flavor out of the way, however, let's move on to the campaign that I propose. Say it with me, class. 1, 2, 3. It's Admiral Yi. Obviously, he really should have had a campaign in the first place instead of one crappy little scenario. Not only would an Admiral Yi campaign have a decent amount of civilization variety, you'd see the Japanese, of course, but also the Jurchens and the Chinese, but his story is incredible. I don't often recommend specific videos, but if you must watch one video about Admiral Yi, make it the Extra Histories video that they did ages ago. It is quite well researched, first of all, beautifully portrayed, and God, it just shows what an unbelievably heroic and important guy this guy was. One of, I'd say, like the top 5 people in all of history for me in terms of being impressive and inspirational. Now, if you didn't want to go with Admiral Yi, which you should, but you don't have to, there are some other contenders. Wang Gyong, who was the founder of Goryeo after usurping the unpopular late Goguryeo leader, he's definitely an option, though you'd only be fighting other Korean civilizations. And then King Taejo, he was the founder of the Joseon dynasty, who usurped the Goryeo dynasty. But once again, you'd only be fighting Koreans. Or maybe not only, he did fight a lot of Japanese pirates. But even so, I think you'd be a fool not to use Admiral Yi. I don't care that he already has an existing scenario. This can be incorporated into a campaign or just removed outright. Some AI player names on screen if you want to take a look at those. Let's move on to the major themes that I identified when I was looking through Korean history. Later Korean history, that is. First of all, bureaucratic society. They did have a Confucian-style caste system, but despite that, they had a much larger middle class than neighboring China ever did, and a relatively small serf class. So overall, they had a very enfranchised populace, with social mobility through education being very achievable thanks to, Confucianism, but being way more practically achieved in Korea than it ever was once in China. This also led to them having a relatively high quality of life. The common citizenry did pretty well for themselves, especially during the Joseon era, when the tech and cultural boom started to take place, and they started accumulating a lot of wealth through trade. And this was under the auspices of a very strong centralized government with a huge amount of influence over every part of society that they wanted influence over, and yet they were shockingly productive. Besides in military regards, which we'll get to later, the Korean governments really seem to have run their nations quite well. Now, another major theme I want to touch upon is artillery. It really cannot be overstated how essential long-range warfare was to the Korean military, pretty much right up until the Imjin War. Not only did they develop cannon technology at an unbelievable rate. I think it's like the fastest of any civilization in the AoE2 timeframe. But they made like dozens of different types of cannons and put them in all sorts of different posts. They had defensive cannons, they had naval cannons, they had some field cannons as well. And these cannons, as well as other artillery pieces, were in large part what allowed them to so effectively defend their borders and especially defend their trade networks on the open sea. It allowed them to keep enemies at a very comfortable distance, using these like classic long-range bombardments that prevented enemies from getting closer or concentrating their forces, which would unfortunately mean that they would end up getting kind of complacent and soft when it came to proper war. Which leads us to the final theme I want to touch upon, which is being on the back foot militarily. Now, obviously, they had their artillery, they had their navy, those things were amazing, but once an enemy bypassed those elements of their defenses, the Joseon and the Goryeo to a lesser extent, but especially the Joseon in this case, were kind of shit out of luck. They became very complacent during their long, prosperous peacetime and let their army go to seed. Not to mention horribly corrupt, dithering government officials who just weren't able to make proper executive military decisions, and as such, allowed for very winnable battles to become very severe losses. Now, that isn't to say that the entire army was shit or anything. There were many individually great soldiers and divisions. It was their commanders in the bureaucracy which held them back and had trouble getting their acts together enough to actually properly coalesce an army that could launch a proper defense, even if the individual soldiers were of great quality. And with those themes now covered, we come to the end of the history section. If that's all you were here for, thank you so very much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe before you go. And next up is the Civ design, LAVAnilla style. Hope you guys are liking that I'm going a little faster than usual. I'm listening to your responses on the poll. Now, let us proceed to an official review of the current in-game Koreans. A la Robbie, of course. The good. And there is some good to be said about this civilization. I think the naval and siege focuses that the current Civ has are both good, but they're actually kind of underemphasized. I've cranked the naval and siege elements a lot in my own build. I think that the sub-themes of archers and defenses are both also good, but again, I think they are overemphasized. Yes, archery and fortifications were very, very important, but not so important that the current number of bonuses feel really justified to me, especially the nature of those bonuses. And lastly, I think that the tech tree is quite good. Like, the official civilization and my build have not an identical tech tree, but only a couple of marked differences between them, so nice job with that for sure. There is, however, some bad to say about the official Korean civilization. First of all, the war wagon. It's nonsense. Additionally, I think that the in-game Koreans have a really criminally crappy eco. I don't think discounts of any kind make sense for like Joseon and Goryeo era Korea. And at the end of the day, Korea was a trade hub with an incredibly enfranchised and wealthy populace. What about that translates to better stone mining? I just don't frickin' understand. Additionally, in terms of their core army comp, their infantry in the current version is way too good and their cavalry is way too bad. Like, in history, those two roles were reversed. Like, they obviously fielded all of the above, but their cavalry was much better than the current versions is. And like I said, the stone mining bonus is really what kind of gets my goat for them eco-wise. I think, if I'm being generous here, it's trying to reference Celadon's ceramics, which were very, very famous in Korea, but that's such a force, at least to me. What part of Celadon ceramics allows you to tower rush your opponent's face? And most importantly, the thing that always annoys me about these sort of civilization designs is that they are cramming over 1,000 years of history into one damn civilization. So my overall grade is a C+. I don't think the Koreans are a badly designed civilization, but I do think I can do them better. And because of that, let's move on to an overview of my Koreans civilization. The Koreans, a naval and siege civilization bonus, the first. Villagers have +3 line of sight. Credit where credit is due. I think this is a great bonus. In my build, this is referencing the enfranchisement of the middle class and the extensive education opportunities that were afforded to them. Kind of hard to translate that into AoE2, so line of sight feels roughly appropriate. Good on you, official build. Second bonus, free fletching as well as tower upgrades. So the fletching thing, I think, is more important to talk about than the tower upgrades. Korea had a incredibly important archery tradition, like insanely important. In earlier eras, they were some of the most famous bowmen in all of Asia. And this was still going strong during the time of Goryeo, but by the time it hit the Joseon era, their archery was starting to lag behind. And this is mostly because their military was lagging behind. There are stories of like Korean arrows pinging off of Japanese armor during the Imjin War, and then realizing, we're about 100+ years out of date with our military tech. Let's use those firearm things that we see the Japanese using. And so this free fletching bonus not only is only fletching for balance reasons, because I think Bodkin would be kind of insane, but having it just be fletching also is trying to show how Korean archery later on started to lag behind. Now, the tower upgrades are a little more basic. I'll get to those in a moment. But before then, Siege Engineers available an age early and costs -50%. Now, I'm basing this bonus off of the incredibly rapid adoption and perfection of siege technology that we see all through Korean history. They not only copped a whole lot from China, but they made it a lot better, especially again in the realm of cannons and to a lesser extent rocketry, which, as you can see from their unique unit, is pretty heavily referenced in this build. Now, getting back to those free tower upgrades, Korea was absolutely littered with these fortified outposts. I think that's what the official build was going for with the free tower upgrades, where I've like, yeah, you know, they built these like small fortifications all over the place, because when like northern Tungus would come rolling in, you got to go hide in the tower and shoot at them and make them run away, and then you come back out. So I think that having towers as a thing for the civilization is fine. I actually quite like it. And so because of that, I have kept this bonus in full. It was how many minor wars and border skirmishes within Korea were fought for a very, very long time. This tower-based thing. Next bonus, the galley line has +1 range in Castle Age and +2 in Imperial Age. Woo! Very exciting. They get the longbow galleys. And this is, again, about quintessential Korean ranged naval tactics. It's how they held back pirates, it's how they secured their trade, it's how they protected their ports, and it was only made possible by innovations in cannon technology that I keep talking about in this video. And lastly, for their civilization bonuses, whenever you build a university, you spawn 2 free villagers. This is, again, talking about Confucianism enabling social mobility via education. And I think it's a nice mid-game eco bonus. But let's move on, lastly, to their team bonus. Receive 10 wood and 10 food for each technology researched. Now, this is like the Spanish bonus with gold, but you get it for wood and food, which makes it much more relevant at the beginning of the game. Since you share it with your teammates, it means that all of you are going to have a slightly smoother economy through like feudal and early Castle Age. Now, this bonus has slightly more nebulous grounding. I was trying to go for like the high quality of life brought about due to the adoption of like foreign breakthroughs, right? Through trade and cultural exchange. I'd say this is like the weakest justification on the whole build, but I quite like how it fits into their overall game plan, and I think it will make them a very popular teammate. Now, from here, I want to talk about the unique units in much more detail. I'm going to put all the stats on screen, so get out your pencils, my friends. The Hwacha. This is a siege weapon trained at the castle for 120 wood and 90 gold. It is a cross between a Chukonu, an organ gun, and a mangonel. So for stats, to summarize this very broadly, this thing shoots a massive volley of arrows in very, very rapid succession. And when I say massive, I mean 16 arrows. But here's the thing. They have a pretty wide miss spread and also have 0% accuracy. So what you're effectively doing is you're like carpet bombing like a 2.5 by 2.5 tile area with this thing. But admittedly, it has great range. It has 9 range from the get-go, though 3 minimum range like a mangonel. It also has a very low rate of fire, but to compensate, it has a great attack bonus versus ships and a very small one versus buildings. Now, I will say the Hwacha does not have fantastic damage. It only has 5 pierce attack, but missed shots deal full damage. I should note it cannot attack ground because it does not have a blast radius. The Hwacha is, unlike other siege weapons, affected by ballistics in full. It also benefits from siege engineers getting +1 range, and it benefits from chemistry for +1 attack, which is very, very consequential on this unit. And effectively, you can think of the Hwacha as the Korean golden boy for super long-ranged land-based artillery warfare. With 10 range in Castle Age, assuming you pick up siege engineers, the only thing this thing cannot outrange are Britain nonsense and castles with bodkin arrow. Historically, Hwacha were used in many contexts, but the ones I saw coming up most often were coastal defense and naval battles, hence my like anti-ship bonus thing thrown in there. In Imperial Age, the Hwacha upgrades to its elite form for 700 food and 1,100 gold. It has, decently improved stats, but to summarize, +5 HP, +1 line of sight, +1 attack, +4 shots, and +1 range, with the range probably being the most consequential among those. So in summary, if you like playing the Britons but always wish that you could shoot even more arrows, play the Koreans and build Hwacha and block out the sky. Second unique unit, the Geobuksion. Again, this is pretty much just the turtle ship. It is a warship trained at the dock in Imperial Age only, for 160 wood, 160 gold. It does not have an elite upgrade, but it needs to be installed for 600 food and 600 gold before being produced. It also has a very long research time on that. This works just like Bombard Tower does now. You have to research the technology before you can actually make the thing. And in terms of its stats, it's very similar to the current elite turtle ship. With really chunky defenses, and it still has that great bonus defense against anti-ship damage. However, My version of the Geobuxion has another power, an aura that debuffs enemy ship pierce attack by 33% while they are close to it. If this isn't possible, my second favorite option would be to allow them to strip armor like an obu, but I think that this debuff aura is much better for reasons I'll get to momentarily. Now, I should note my version of the Geobuxion does not have blast damage and cannot attack ground. It is, however, still affected by ballistics, though not siege engineers. Now, the Geobuxion was a secret weapon that was crafted by Admiral Yi and a team of elite engineers. They remained extremely tough to mass produce even once they had been properly developed. And that's why I wanted to make this a really tough unit to get to. Now, the reason I have the debuff aura is that smoke was dispensed from the dragon head of the Geobuxion, which was not only used to obscure vision, but also was like a morale thing. It looked like a flaming dragon's maw. So hence why I really like that ability, and also I think it adds to the Geobuxion's like vision of being an oceanic linebacker, like right up in front of your ships and gumming up the enemy and making them have like an absolute nightmare trying to deal with these stupid things, but needing to deal with them because they're debuffing their attack. It just feels like a great capstone for the Korean Navy. I also think that the in-game model we have right now is okay, but it should be a little bit smaller. They weren't huge in real life, and it should also have a sail because they weren't just ore-powered. Now, let's move on to unique technologies, now that we've talked about the unique units. First one, Castle Age technology, Hyungdoksa. Apologies for my pronunciation through this video, by the way. Korean is not my specialty. Now, this again makes it so that technologies, excluding age-ups, research 50% faster, and buildings get +4 line of sight. It costs 150 wood and 300 gold. And Hyungdoksa was the earliest movable metal type, which was invented in Goryeo in the late 1200s AD. China had movable type for a while before then, but they didn't have metal type, which is important because metal type doesn't break very much, and also you can recast it into new shapes and letters, which is very, very useful. Now, Hyungdoksa was one of the things that enabled the huge Korean technological explosion over the next couple centuries, but this was especially true when it was later paired with the development of the Korean Hangul alphabet, which cut down the number of individual characters that you needed by hundreds and hundreds of times, and enabled the rapid transfer of ideas, which is why I had that like building line of sight idea. So Hyungdoksa has its finger in many pies, but I think overall makes a pretty cohesive and interesting package. Imperial Age unique technology, Chongtong. This gives all cannons plus 10% attack and faster projectile speed. It costs 400 food and 600 gold, and it benefits bombard cannons, bombard towers, cannon galleons, and the Geobuxion in terms of its attack. The faster projectile speed only applies to bombard towers and cannon galleons, bringing their sluggish nonsense balls up to the proper speed that bombard cannons and Geobuxion enjoy. Chongtong was the Joseon era word for cannons, and like I keep harping on about, Korean cannon tech was unbelievable. They had a cannon for every occasion. And so I felt like a technology that just boosts all of your cannons made just too much sense to ignore. It'll really assist in their ultra late game, super long range death ball thing that they have going on, which will put them in like a similar camp to civilizations like the Turks and Britons in terms of death from afar. Now from here, let's talk briefly about the one regional unit I would be adding to this Korean's build, available to a couple other civilizations as well, namely the Eruptor. This is a gunpowder unit trained at the archery range for 45 food and 50 gold. It is a precursor unit to the hand cannoneer available in Castle Age. It's upgraded automatically when you research chemistry, which means that it has 0 opportunity cost to use, and in fact allows you to mass up your hand cannons much earlier if you want to go that direction. In terms of its stats, it is just roundly much worse than the hand cannon, but that's still a really scary unit to be fighting in Castle Age. The first known hand cannons evolved from the fire lance, which was a melee cavalry weapon. I know a lot of people think fire lances were what you called the shooty ones. No, those were the stabby, explodey in your face ones. When they started to take the explodey part off of the spear and then use it by itself, that's when you get the Eruptor. Now, I don't think the Eruptor needs to be super duper widespread. I more see it as a sneaky way to give a foot gunpowder unit to civilizations who really, really deserve one, rather than just giving civilizations who already have good gunpowder even more good gunpowder. The following civilizations, namely the Chinese, the Malay, and my own Jurchen's civilization, go take a look at that up there, would receive the Eruptor, plus plenty of civilizations yet unmade. I will also note that I did strongly consider this unit for the Japanese, Saracens, Tatars, and Vietnamese. Big credit, by the way, to my viewer Risagero for this idea. He submitted a fantastic Jurchen's Theorycraft in a contest I ran eons ago that had a very similar idea to this. Risagero, thank you, my brother. This one's for you. Let's move on now to some tech tree grades. I'm going to be going through these very, very fast. A lot of visuals will be up on the screen. Their infantry is a C-. No champion, no supplies, no arson, no blast furnace, no plate mail armor, and no conscription. Eee. Yeah, their infantry is doo-doo, but they do have not awful halberdiers. Yeah, their halberdiers are squishy. Yes, their halberdiers don't do as much damage, but they'll still do halberdier things. You'll probably make them. Archers, it's an A-. They have a perfect, 100% perfect archery range with the added benefit of the Eruptor if you're going hand cannons, and they get free fletching, but they miss conscription in Imperial Age, and conscription just really, really helps no matter what. So overall, if they got conscription, I give them an A, as is I give them an A-. It's an A right up until Imperial Age. Cavalry, it's a B. They miss Paladin and Blast Furnace and Conscription. But, unlike the current build, they are much, much better at early raiding, both with Knights and with Scouts. Nextly, their Siege. It is an A. They don't have Siege Ram, but they have everything else. Their Siege Engineers is available early. They have the Huacha. They have Chongtong to boost up their cannons. It is a great siege tree. This is 100% a civilization that deserves to be classified as siege-based. Next, defenses. It is an A. They miss hoardings, which the current civilization does as well, which I kind of liked after I looked at it for like half an hour. They also get free fletching and tower upgrades, which was great. And you could argue that the villager line of sight bonus, plus the incentive to build a university to get some free villagers, kind of factors into their defenses grade. But overall, if you wanted to call this civilization naval and defensive, I wouldn't really object to that. I just think the siege element is kind of cool and underrated, and we need more siege civs in the game. Navy, it's an A+. They deserve to have a top 3 Navy, and I will fight anyone to the death on that. They have a perfect dock. They have the Geo Buxiong, they have Chongtong, which affects both Geo Buxiong and Cannon Galleon. They have free fletching, and they have the awesome galley line range bonus. This should be a civilization to be feared on any water map, just as they were in the South China Sea and Pacific. Economy, it is a B+. They miss crop rotation, and I guess sappers kind of counts as economy, but it's hardly a factor. They get the Hyungdoksa technology, as well as their vill spawning from universities. They have their team bonus. You could kind of argue villager line of sight is like a tangential economy boost. Their core civilization bonuses are not hugely impactful, but should help kind of smooth out your game in a way that will probably be pretty consequential, even if you can't necessarily feel it every step of the way. And lastly, their monks, it's a D+. Yeah. They do have redemption and block printing, but they don't have sanctity and fervor, and that's bad. Monks are monks are monks are monks. They are boring, and I hate talking about them. Let's move on to the game plan that I envision for this civilization. Their early game, I give a B-. You do get some tangential eco help, though again, it's kind of tenuous. And fletching does really help with archers, tower rushes, and galleys, so you have a bunch of different strategies enabled, plus your scouts are perfectly respectable, and your men-at-arms can technically work. Their mid-game, I up it to a B, however. Now, if you won the early game, you can press your advantage pretty substantially with siege. Getting early siege engineers is really nice, but other than that, you're probably going to need to turtle up if you want to try to like capitalize on University and Hyungdoksa to build an eco advantage, because even though your siege engineers power spike on your Huacha and your mangonels sounds really, really cool, and it is, it's also quite vulnerable. Their late game, however, I up to a B+. Like I said earlier, they have kind of a Britain or Turkish, like super ranged hyper death ball that when you get it up will feel so fun and satisfying. You'll just murder everything. Ha ha! It'll be awesome. But it is very tough to keep that army topped up between not having conscription and also siege being like, innately expensive, right? You still do have a really good turtling potential if you're being like pushed back into your base, but you're still going to have to play proactively even if you can fall back on your turtle when you need to. More broadly, the Korean game plan is defined by having, I'd say, a very smooth eco, even if it's not like blow your socks off good, with good early and mid timings that transition into like a really terrifying late game with some serious vulnerabilities in terms of, again, like unit replacement and army cost. I will note, though, that they are amazing on water, no matter the stage of the game, as it should be. They have kind of a similar playstyle to land on water, you know, early mid timings and then late game ultra range death ball, but you don't have any of the downsides, and I think it will be very fun to play with. Now, this brings us to the end of the design section. If that's all you're here for, thank you very much for watching. And lastly, we are going to touch upon loose threads, beginning by discussing a couple of lingering uncertainties that I have in regards to this build. The biggest one being, is the eco good enough or is it too good? I was hoping to have a lot of like tangential incremental benefits without like big power, but I might be underestimating the university thing. Or I might be overestimating the whole thing and it's just all absolutely crap. Nextly, they might be too oppressive on water. Like they do deserve to be really good on water. Between like the small wood bonus you get from the team bonus thing, free fletching, extra range, super powerful late game unique unit, just might be too much. I do think they deserve to be minimum top 3 water civ, and I think that this design accomplishes that. I don't think they're too weak on water, but I want to make sure it doesn't just invalidate all other water civilizations. Lastly, is missing conscription too punishing? I think a lot of people in my comments are going to say that it is, but for me, it's like the key balance point that I wanted to put in to compensate for their like hideous ranged firepower, right? And their turtling. I love it when civilizations have a really distinct weakness to balance out really flavorful and potent strengths. And missing conscription was kind of my ticket to doing that in this case. I do think it is an uncertainty. If you want to see some frequently asked questions that I anticipated a bunch of people asking down in the comments, take a look on the right now. And with that being said, let's move on to the LAVAnte-Garde section. LAVAnte-Garde, the impossible, the improbable, and the often idiotic but innovative ideas that have defined my channel for going on 2 and a bit years now. Let's begin by talking about some of the unique units, technologies, and regionals that I considered for this build, and if I had my way and could do whatever I want, I would add most, if not all, of these. The big one was a unique unit called the Sambyolcho. This was a guerrilla cavalry unit, although I think they also fought on foot, but my design here is a cavalry unit wielding like a traditional Korean riding flail, which is such a cool weapon. And I had a bunch of ideas for these. These were like freedom fighters against the Japanese and the earlier Mongols. And I thought it could be cool if they trained faster when your buildings are under attack. And maybe they were stronger against enemies who are attacking your buildings. Maybe they could even like teleport on top of enemies to represent how good they were at like getting around the country and flanking incoming invaders. And sound cool. But beyond that, the other ideas I have are solid, but just didn't fit in super well. Take a look on screen if you want to see all of them in full. Oops, my table bonuses got cut off. But there's only a couple others I want to specifically touch upon, one being the 2 regionals, namely a Pistolier Cavalry, which I've heard many people say they wanted, and I would like too, like short-range firearm cavalry with a charge attack or something. The Koreans did use these. They were actually quite known for it. And the other one being like a warrior monk type unit, like a Buddhist warrior monks that were practically fearless, are a unifying factor between most of the East Asian countries in particular. And in Korea, they were known as the Sungbyong. So Korea was no exception, even if you hear about the Japanese and Chinese ones more often. In terms of the tabled bonuses, there was only one that I was really sad not to be able to use. Namely, the idea that losing a town center or a castle could unlock a missing technology. Korea didn't like really heavily adopt like hand cannons and arquebuses until Japan kicked their ass for a little while. And I thought that this could be a cool way of representing that. Having like certain unit and like armor unlocks or something be kind of stuck behind an enemy hurting you pretty badly first. It seemed thematic, but a little too far afield. And with all that, we come to the end of this Korean's journey. Thank you guys so much for watching. Before we end, a quick look at the rework Likeliometer. In my opinion, how likely is it that the Koreans as a civilization will get a major Persians-style rework anytime in the near distant future, maybe looking a little something like what I have proposed here? And on the Likeliometer, we have a 3 out of 10. Not because they don't deserve it, but because I don't think the devs will think they are a high priority when there are much bigger fishes to fry. The devs have shown that they are very reluctant to do major reworks for pretty good reason. And so because of that, I don't think the Koreans are going to get some love for quite some time. But that's just what I think. Now I want to hear what you guys have to say. How'd you like the build? How'd you like this new format, the new aesthetic, the new flow of the channel, the fact that I have 28 slides instead of the 10 that I used to have? And what do you want to see me do next? Don't forget, once again, to go vote in my channel direction poll down in the description if you want to have your voice heard with what the Robbie Lava channel looks like. But until then, my name has been Robbie Howell, and ciao for now.